In the heart of New York City, a millionaire CEO walks into a crumbling, dust-covered theater, planning to demolish it like so many buildings before. Lucas Anderson, 47, built an empire from tearing down the past. But when he hears a young girl singing on the empty stage, everything stops. The song? A Broadway classic, the same one his late sister sang in her final performance. And the voice? Hauntingly familiar. Who is this girl? Why does she know that song? As Lucas digs deeper, memories he buried long ago begin to resurface. What he uncovers changes not just his future, but his definition of family. This isn't just a story about real estate. It's about healing, second chances, and the voice of a child reigniting a man's forgotten heart. Subscribe now for more stories that prove sometimes the stage finds you. Lucas Anderson stood beneath the faded marquee of the Delacorte Theater, his overcoat pulled tight against the chill of an early Manhattan spring. The building loomed like a forgotten monument, its once grand facade now chipped, dust-streaked, and silent. He exhaled slowly, the air crisp against his lips, and pushed open the rusted doors with a metallic groan. Inside, dust hung thick in the sunlight that filtered through broken stained-glass panels. Rows of decaying velvet seats faced a stage shrouded in shadows, the wooden floor warped with time and water damage. He hadn't meant to come alone, but when his team had canceled the site visit, claiming delays, Lucas insisted on seeing it for himself. He needed to. The Delacorte wasn't just another acquisition. It wasn't just another old theater soon to be transformed into sleek condos or a polished retail complex. It was history. His history. 12 years ago, his younger sister Eva had taken her final bow on this very stage. A brilliant Broadway understudy who had dazzled in a surprise lead role. 2 weeks later, she was gone. A car crash. Midnight. Rain. No goodbye. Lucas hadn't stepped inside a theater since. A snapping sound echoed from above, pulling him from the memory. He froze. There shouldn't have been anyone else here. He slowly climbed the aisle steps, cautious, until the softest sound reached him. Music. Not a recording, but live. A voice, delicate and sincere, cutting through the dust and grief like a blade of light. Somewhere, over the rainbow. He turned sharply toward the stage. A small girl, no more than 11, stood in the center, her eyes closed, singing as if the world beyond the walls didn't exist. Her voice was high, slightly breathy, but filled with the kind of yearning that didn't come from mimicry. It was real. Lucas stepped into the shadows of the wings, watching quietly. His chest tightened as the girl finished the final note and held the silence. Then, as if sensing him, she opened her eyes. She didn't flinch. Instead, she smiled and tilted her head. "I didn't think anyone else came here anymore." Lucas cleared his throat. "They don't. Not usually." She hopped off the edge of the stage with practiced ease and dusted off her worn jeans. "I come after school. It's quiet here, and the acoustics are better than the shelter's bathroom." Lucas blinked. "Shelter?" She nodded, unfazed. "I live at Hope House, up the street. Miss Kay says I'm not supposed to wander, but she never said anything about abandoned theaters." She paused. "Are you going to report me?" He shook his head slowly. No, I'm not." The girl seemed to take that as permission and began gathering a small backpack from one of the front row seats. "My name's Sophie. I'm 11 3/4. My mom used to sing too." Lucas's gaze lingered on her face, something stirring in his memory. "Used to?" Sophie hesitated. "She passed last year. Cancer." Her voice softened. "She used to sing in bars and little lounges. Said the Delacorte was her dream stage. I think that's why I like it here." Lucas's heart gave a quiet lurch. "What was your mother's name?" "Anna." Sophie opened a side pouch of her bag and pulled out a worn photograph. "That's her." He stepped forward, and his breath caught. In the photo, Anna smiled with an arm around a much younger Eva. and, hanging from Anna's neck, a necklace, a silver charm he remembered vividly. He had gifted it to Eva on the night of her debut. Lucas swallowed hard. Where did she get that necklace? Sophie looked down at the image, then up at him. It was a gift, I think. Mom said it reminded her of someone she used to care about a long time ago. She never said who. Lucas crouched to meet her eyes, stunned. Do you come here often, Sophie? Almost every day. She paused, watching his expression. Why? Are you buying it or something? Yes, he said slowly. I'm considering it. Her face fell a little. Please don't tear it down. It's the only place I feel like she hears me. Lucas stood silently for a long moment, the ghost of his sister's laughter echoing faintly in the back of his mind. The walls of the Delacourt, despite their decay, suddenly didn't feel so empty. I'm Lucas, he said finally, extending a hand. Sophie shook it, her grip surprisingly firm. Nice to meet you. As she headed for the exit, her footsteps light against the worn floors, Lucas remained still, staring at the stage. That night, he didn't sleep. His mind swirled with questions and memories, with voices of the past, and the weight of a girl's song that had cracked something open in him. He had come to erase the past. Instead, he'd just found a reason to remember. Lucas couldn't shake the sound of her voice. Even as he sat behind his polished mahogany desk in a midtown high-rise, overlooking the city he'd spent decades dominating, Sophie's song lingered. It haunted the edges of his thoughts like an echo too stubborn to fade. Contracts blurred in front of his eyes. Meetings passed without focus. His assistant knocked twice that afternoon to remind him about a high-stakes pitch with a European buyer. He nodded absently, murmured he'd be there, but his heart was still back at the Delacourt. He finally gave in and opened a drawer lined with old files he hadn't touched in years. Buried under layers of acquisition reports and site development maps, he found it. A yellowed folder labeled Eva. Inside were programs from her shows, photographs of her on stage, and one small article cut from a community paper. Local sister act stuns Broadway open mic. A blurry photo showed Eva and a younger woman with a similar smile. Anna. Lucas sat back, stunned. Anna had once worked wardrobe for one of Eva's productions, he now remembered vaguely. Quiet, polite, devoted. The three of them had shared late-night takeout and rehearsal gossip in their early years, but she'd disappeared from their lives around the same time Eva's career had started accelerating. No explanations, no farewells. Eva had seemed heartbroken about it, but Lucas hadn't thought much of it then. His focus was always on expansion, capital, ROI. Now the pieces were shifting in his mind, and Sophie's face fit all too perfectly. The next morning, Lucas returned to the Delacourt. Sunlight struggled to breach the dirty windows, casting long beams through the dust. The old theater felt less like a relic today and more like a sanctuary. Sophie wasn't there yet, but on the front row seat where she'd left her backpack, something else now sat, a music notebook. He opened it cautiously. Inside were lyrics scrawled in a child's looping hand. Songs, dreams, scribbled notes like, feels better in F major, and sing to mom like she's still listening. Lucas's throat tightened as he flipped page after page. Then the door creaked open. You came back, Sophie said, surprised but not unwelcome. Lucas turned to see her balancing a paper bag and a thermos. Thought you might be hungry, she added, placing the items on the edge of the stage. Miss Kay says people think better when they eat. Lucas stepped forward, taking a seat in one of the old theater chairs. Miss Kay sounds like she's got some wisdom. She runs the shelter. She used to be a choir teacher, Sophie explained, unwrapping a sandwich and offering half to him. You don't talk much. Lucas accepted the sandwich wordlessly, uncharacteristically grateful for the silence between them. He waited a beat. Your mom. She ever talk about this place? About why she brought you here? Sophie nodded, her gaze distant. She said this stage was where she saw someone perform once. Someone she loved. She hesitated, chewing her lip. I think it hurt her too much to talk about it more, but I could tell she missed him. She said he had eyes that watched the world like it was a puzzle no one could solve. Lucas froze. That's a very specific thing to remember, he said gently. Sophie shrugged. I remember things like that. I don't forget people. He wanted to ask more, wanted to rip the answers from the air, but something in her tone, in the protective way she wrapped herself in those memories, stopped him. Instead, he said softly, You're good, Sophie. That song yesterday, you made it feel alive. Her cheeks flushed with the praise. It's not mine. I found the lyrics in one of Mom's boxes. I just added what I thought it needed. Lucas reached into his coat pocket and pulled out an old program. Is this her? He asked, showing her the photograph. Sophie stared at it with wide eyes. That's the picture on our dresser, she whispered. Where did you get it? Lucas hesitated. She was part of our lives once, my sister and I. Your mom worked with her. Sophie's hands tightened around the paper bag. People always say they knew her after she's gone. Lucas winced at the sting of truth in her words. I'm not saying it to sound kind, he said carefully. I'm saying it because I think we're more connected than either of us realized. Sophie tilted her head, curious. Are you a singer too? Lucas let out a quiet laugh. Not even close. But you know music, she pressed. I knew someone who made me believe in it, he answered honestly. They sat there for a while, eating cold sandwiches in the dusty stillness of a nearly forgotten place. Eventually, Sophie asked, If you're buying this theater, what are you going to do with it? Lucas looked around at the crumbling balconies, the faded curtain, the hollow echoes of long-lost performances. He looked back at her. That depends, he said. On what? On whether you'll help me bring it back. Her eyes lit up, suspiciously hopeful. Like, make it a real theater again? He nodded. A place where people don't just remember the past, but build something new. Sophie smiled slowly, like she didn't quite believe it, but wanted to. I'd like that, she said. Lucas stood, brushing dust from his coat. Then let's start with a fresh coat of paint, and maybe a working light bulb or two. And just like that, something shifted. Not just in the theater, but in both of them. The next morning, Lucas showed up with 2 cups of hot cocoa and a clipboard tucked under his arm. Sophie was already inside the theater, curled up cross-legged at the edge of the stage, humming softly to herself as she flipped through her notebook. Her face lit up as she saw him. You came back again, she said, a little breathless. I made a promise, Lucas replied with a rare smile, handing her one of the cups. Besides, I figured I owed you some backup on this renovation you signed us up for. She grinned, accepting the cocoa. Miss Kay says people who keep promises are the ones worth singing about. Lucas paused. That kind of statement, simple, earnest, wasn't the kind of thing he heard in boardrooms or business deals. He tucked it away like a note in a favorite song. They got to work. The old stage was covered in decades of grime, the velvet curtains moth-eaten and faded. Lucas peeled off his tailored jacket and rolled up his sleeves, startling Sophie as he bent to lift a rotting wood plank near the orchestra pit. You don't look like someone who sweeps floors, she teased, trying to pry open a stuck window. I've spent my life tearing places down, he admitted, grunting as the plank came loose. Figured it's time I learn what it feels like to rebuild something. Sophie studied him for a second before returning to the window. You talk like people in old movies. Lucas laughed, a deep, unexpected sound. Well, I guess I am kind of an old movie. By afternoon, the two had made visible progress, clearing the aisles of debris, Opening up light to the balcony rose, unearthing a forgotten piano covered in a thick layer of dust. Sophie ran her fingers across the keys. A few worked. Most didn't. "I can ask Miss Kay if she knows someone who can fix it," she offered, already thinking through solutions like a little stage manager. Lucas nodded. "I'll have my people bring in a tuner. If it can be saved, it will be." Sophie tilted her head. "You have people for pianos?" Lucas chuckled. "I have people for everything. Doesn't mean I've always used them for the right things." That quieted the room a bit. Sophie sat on the edge of the stage again, sipping the last of her cocoa. "My mom used to sing here," she said suddenly. "Not on the stage, just in the seats, after hours. She said it made her feel close to someone she lost." Lucas's hands froze where he was stacking broken wood. "Who did she lose?" he asked gently. Sophie looked down at her cup. "She never said, but sometimes she'd cry while I sang. I think it was someone who left her, maybe someone who didn't know about me." Lucas swallowed hard. "Do you ever miss someone you didn't get to say goodbye to?" she asked quietly. "All the time," Lucas said. "I miss my sister every day." Sophie's eyes lifted to his. "Your sister was the one in the photo, right?" He nodded. "Her name was Ava. She was everything I wasn't. Brave, free, brilliant. She used to dance right where you're sitting." Sophie looked down at the dusty floorboards beneath her. "Maybe her songs are still here, stuck in the walls." Lucas blinked at the poetic honesty of it. "Maybe," he said softly. That evening, Sophie tugged him to the back of the theater where an old dressing room lay half-collapsed. "Wait here," she said, then darted inside. She returned with a shoebox. "I found this a while ago," she explained, handing it to him. It was tucked behind one of the old mirrors. Inside were mementos, a dried rose, a program from a benefit show, and a delicate silver necklace, a single charm shaped like a crescent moon. Lucas gasped. "I gave this to Eva," he whispered, fingers trembling. "She wore it every opening night." Sophie looked unsure. "Is it okay that I kept it?" He shook his head. "It's more than okay. I think maybe you were meant to find it." They sat in silence for a while, the only sound the creaking of old beams above. Finally, Sophie asked, "Do you think I'm like her?" Lucas didn't hesitate. "More than you know." She smiled, then stood, brushing off her jeans. "We should clean out the balcony next." Lucas watched her walk ahead, the necklace glinting softly in her palm. A strange sense of purpose surged in him, something deeper than profit, stronger than ambition. For the first time in years, he felt like he was exactly where he needed to be. And he wasn't building for himself anymore. He was building for her. By the fourth afternoon, the theater had started to breathe again. Dust still clung to the rafters, and the broken chandelier swayed like a weary ghost, but the air felt different, lighter, like something sacred was waking up. Lucas arrived earlier than usual, his usually sleek schedule cleared without apology. His assistant had stopped questioning his absences. The real estate board still hadn't received his updated development plans for the site, and his business partner kept calling, but Lucas let it all ring into voicemail. He stepped into the dark lobby of the theater, the creak of the old wooden doors greeting him like an old friend. And there she was, Sophie, already on stage, illuminated by a shaft of golden sunlight cutting through the cracked skylight. She was barefoot, singing softly to herself as she swirled in a slow circle. Her voice was delicate, but carried with uncanny strength through the empty space. Lucas froze. She was singing Eva's final performance piece, Starlight's Promise, a song written just months before the accident that stole her away. "Where did you learn that?" he asked, voice trembling as he stepped closer. Sophie turned, not startled, just calm, like she had expected him. My mom taught it to me, she said simply. She said it was her favorite song ever. Said it reminded her of the bravest person she ever knew. Lucas's breath caught. He lowered himself into the front row, resting his hands on his knees, suddenly feeling every year of the grief he'd tried to pave over with blueprints and building permits. I wrote that song, he said finally, for my sister, Eva. Sophie blinked, her expression unreadable for a moment. Then she stepped off the stage and approached him, that little wooden box in her hand again. I wanted to show you something, she whispered, settling beside him. She opened the box again and took out a second photograph. Lucas hadn't seen it before. It was old, slightly water-damaged, but unmistakable. Eva, laughing with her arm around a young woman Lucas didn't recognize, blonde, freckled, with Sophie's smile. That's my mom, Sophie said quietly. She said this was the only picture she had of her best friend. They used to sing together. This was taken before she got sick. Lucas stared. She never told me Eva had a best friend, he murmured. She was so private about everything outside of music. Mom said Eva saved her, Sophie said softly. Said she helped her get out of something bad. That she gave her this necklace, Sophie held up the crescent moon charm, when she needed courage the most. Lucas's heart thundered. That explains why you have it, he said, shaken. Eva must have passed it to her. That necklace was everything to her. She called it a promise, her way of saying, I see you, even when no one else does. Sophie stared at the charm, then looked up at Lucas. Do you think she saw me? Lucas swallowed thickly. I think she saw you long before I did. Sophie smiled faintly, then looked toward the stage. I don't want this place to be torn down, she said. I know everyone says it's old and broken, but when I sing here, I feel like someone's listening. Lucas followed her gaze. He didn't need a feasibility report or development projections. He didn't need city permits or investor approval. What he needed was to stop running from what this place meant. I won't tear it down, he said firmly. Sophie turned to him, eyes wide. I'll restore it, he added. We'll bring it back. For Eva, for your mom, for you. Her face lit up, but there was a shadow behind her smile. They'll say it's a waste, she murmured, that it's just a building. Lucas leaned forward, his voice low but certain. Then let them say it. Sometimes what matters most isn't what makes money. It's what makes meaning. They spent the rest of the day drawing up sketches and ideas, Lucas on his iPad, Sophie doodling next to him with colored pencils and crayons. She wanted a space for music lessons, a tiny stage just for kids, and murals of stars on the ceiling. So, it always feels like nighttime when the songs begin. At one point, Lucas caught himself laughing, deep, genuine laughter that echoed off the stone and wood. He hadn't laughed like that in years. That night, as he drove Sophie back to the group home, she said quietly from the passenger seat, Thank you for not laughing at me. Most grown-ups do when I talk about stars and songs. Lucas glanced at her, then gently reached over to ruffle her hair. I don't laugh at people with vision, he said. I build for them. As she disappeared into the shelter with a wave, Lucas sat in the car for a long moment, hands on the steering wheel, staring at the darkening sky. He wasn't just rebuilding a theater. He was rebuilding himself, piece by precious piece, through the voice of a little girl who somehow carried the soul of two women he'd never stopped loving. Lucas stood silently in the echoing hallway of the group home, watching Sophie through the glass as she tucked her worn backpack into a cubby. It was late, and she was tired, but she still hummed under her breath, always humming, that same haunting melody from the stage, the one Eva used to sing when she thought no one was listening. The warden, a sharp-eyed woman named Mrs. Doyle, joined him with a clipboard clutched to her chest. She's one of the good ones, she said in a low voice. Quiet, respectful, gets straight A's, never asks for anything. That usually means they've learned not to expect much. Lucas nodded solemnly, the truth in those words stinging more than he anticipated. I'd like to speak with you about taking her in, permanently. Mrs. Doyle gave him a measured look. You family? Lucas hesitated. I didn't know I was, until a few days ago. She narrowed her eyes. You're the one who bought the theater? He nodded. She talks about you, says you don't talk down to her. Lucas offered a faint smile. She doesn't talk down to me either. The woman exhaled. We'll need documentation. You'll need to prove guardianship, connection, background checks, and if there's any family history of custody. There isn't, Lucas interrupted gently. I only just found out about her. Her mother was my sister's best friend, and the more time I spend with Sophie, the more I realize she might be the last thread I have left. Mrs. Doyle's tone softened. She deserves someone who means that. Later that night, back in his apartment, Lucas sat at his dining table alone. In front of him lay 2 boxes. One was filled with legal paperwork and city permits for the restoration project. The other, smaller, was Eva's old memory box. He had kept it hidden away for over a decade, unable to face what it held. He opened it slowly, carefully, photos. Notes written in her messy, passionate handwriting. Playbills faded with time. And at the bottom, a single silver chain, half of a heart. The other half had once belonged to her best friend, Sophie's mother. His hands trembled as he stared at the charm. How many times had Eva spoken of her? The one who saved me when I couldn't sing, she'd said once. She gave me back my voice, so I gave her half my heart. Lucas felt something shift deep within him, grief no longer just sharp and jagged, but full of something warmer. Regret, yes, but also resolve. He stood, walked to the living room where he'd set up a small keyboard and pressed a few keys. The notes were tentative at first, unfamiliar after years of silence. Then, slowly, a melody formed. Not Eva's, his. The next morning, Lucas returned to the group home with a folder under one arm. Her mother's name was Rachel Monroe, he told Mrs. Doyle. Here's the photo of her and Eva, the matching necklace, and this. He passed over a notarized letter from his attorney. I want to file for guardianship, and I'd like to give Sophie my sister's last name, if she wants it. Mrs. Doyle took the documents, brows raised. You're serious about this? Lucas nodded. She's already carrying so much on her own. It's time someone stood beside her. When Sophie joined him at the front desk moments later, she looked confused. We're going somewhere? She asked, cautiously hopeful. Lucas smiled. Only if you want to. He knelt slightly, lowering his voice. I've been thinking about you, about how much you remind me of someone I loved deeply, and I'd like to offer something. He reached into his coat pocket and held out a new charm, a crescent moon paired with a star. I had this made. One for you, one for me. We're both searching for light, Sophie, but maybe we can do it together. Her eyes welled. Like a family. Lucas's voice cracked. Exactly like that. She took the charm in trembling fingers. Can I still sing in the theater? He grinned. That's part of the deal. But there's something else I'd like to ask you. She tilted her head, curious. Would you be okay taking a new last name? My sister's last name. Anderson. Sophie blinked. Like yours? He nodded, gently. Only if you want to. She stared down at the charm again, then whispered, Then I'm Sophie Anderson. Lucas felt something in his chest give way, a dam long held by grief, now replaced by the healing sound of a child choosing to belong. They left the shelter hand in hand. And for the first time in years, Lucas didn't feel like he was walking away from something, but toward it, toward family, toward purpose, toward a second chance born not from guilt, but from grace. The next morning, Lucas stood with Sophie in front of the decaying facade of the old Crescent Theater. The early sunlight cut through the cloudy New York sky, casting soft gold across the weathered marquee. The letters were faded, half hanging like crooked teeth, but to Sophie, it gleamed like a palace. "This is it?" she asked, holding tightly to his hand. Lucas nodded. "This is where your voice first found me." She smiled faintly. "I like the echo. It makes my voice feel bigger than it is." Lucas pushed open the heavy front doors, which groaned in protest. The lobby was a tomb of shadows and dust, but through it all, a kind of sacred silence lingered. They stepped inside together, their footsteps muffled by a thick layer of time. Lucas looked around slowly. Where others might have seen a forgotten ruin, Sophie saw a cathedral of memory. "I used to think places like this died," he said softly. "But maybe they just fall asleep, waiting for someone to sing them awake." Sophie let out a giggle. "Then we better start singing." Lucas chuckled, then crouched to her eye level. "I made a promise, remember? This theater stays standing. But it needs help, a lot of it." She tilted her head. "Can I help clean it?" "You can be in charge of the stage," he said seriously. "That's the most important part." Her chest puffed up with pride. "Deal." Later that week, Lucas brought in a team of architects, professionals who'd worked on everything from opera houses to concert halls. As they wandered through the structure with clipboards and laser levels, Sophie skipped ahead, pointing out every corner that needed love. "This dressing room had a ghost," she said brightly, peeking through a chipped door. "But he only comes out when the singing's off-key." The lead architect, a grizzled man named Tom Russo, laughed. "Well then, we better get this place tuned up fast." Tom turned to Lucas as Sophie ran toward the stage. "She's something else. Reminds me of my niece." Lucas watched her leap over broken floorboards with the grace of a dancer. "She reminds me of my sister." Tom's face softened. "I heard the story. I think what you're doing here, it's bigger than just preservation." Lucas nodded. "I'm not restoring this place for real estate. I'm restoring it for her." As construction began, so did a new rhythm in Lucas's life. Every morning, he dropped Sophie off at school with a packed lunch, usually slightly crooked sandwiches she found adorable. Every afternoon, he picked her up, and they stopped by the theater. She helped dust seats and label rows, and Lucas found himself learning things he'd never made time for before: how to tune a piano, how to remove gum from velvet curtains, how to laugh with his heart open. One Saturday evening, after hours of painting backstage flats, they stood side by side on the half-finished stage. Lucas handed her a bottle of water, then looked out over the rows of dusty seats. "Do you miss her?" Sophie asked quietly. Lucas didn't pretend to misunderstand. "Every day." She leaned against him. "Sometimes I hear her, in my head, especially when I'm scared." He looked down at her, eyes stinging. "That's her gift to you, Soph. Some people leave money, some people leave memories. Your mom and my sister, they left music." Sophie nodded solemnly. "Do you think she'd be proud of me?" Lucas bent to press his lips gently to her forehead. "I think she already is." But not everyone was applauding their dream. At a board meeting the following Monday, Lucas sat in a high-rise conference room across from several stiff-necked executives. On the screen behind them was a financial projection slide titled "Lost Revenue, the Crescent Investment." "The Crescent Theater is a dead property," said Margaret Fields, a major shareholder. "You bought it with your own capital, yes, but optics matter. Our shareholders are calling it an emotional gamble." Lucas clasped his hands. "It's more than optics. This is about legacy." Margaret's eyes narrowed. "You're known as a strategist, Lucas, not a sentimentalist. You start rebuilding crumbling theaters because of some orphan girl." "Sophie is not just some orphan," he interrupted, voice like granite. "She's my niece, and she's why I've remembered who I used to be before all of this." Silence fell over the room. Then came the final blow. If you continue channeling company resources, logistics, architecture partnerships, even PR, to this personal project, will be forced to call for a leadership review. Lucas stood slowly. Do what you need to do. And with that, he walked out. That night, back at the apartment, Sophie was waiting at the piano with a new melody she'd written. She didn't ask how his meeting went. She just slid over and made space for him on the bench. "Play with me," she said, and he did. And, with each note, the weight of the boardroom dissolved, replaced by something far more powerful, a little girl's hope, and a man rediscovering the music inside him. For weeks, Sophie and Lucas poured their energy into the renovation. The theater slowly shed its shroud of neglect, revealing bones of elegance beneath the dust. Each sweep of paint, each repaired stair, became more than a restoration. It became a healing. But while Sophie seemed to blossom, her voice stronger, her smile wider, tension outside their sanctuary grew like mold on forgotten plaster. It started with whispers. At the real estate firm's mid-quarter meeting, Lucas noticed how conversations quieted when he entered, how colleagues avoided eye contact. His longtime CFO, Brett Halston, barely looked up from his tablet. After the meeting, Lucas caught him in the hallway. "You've been quiet lately." Brett adjusted his glasses. "I've been busy." "With the merger?" "With damage control," Brett said flatly. Lucas blinked. "Come again?" Brett stepped into a small meeting room, motioning Lucas inside. "We've been fielding media inquiries. Rumors say you're funneling capital and company assets into a personal passion project, the Crescent Theater." Lucas's jaw tightened. "I haven't touched a cent of the firm's budget for that." "Doesn't matter. Perception is the poison, not the reality. Shareholders don't know the difference. They think you've lost focus." Lucas sat down slowly. "I haven't lost focus. I've finally found what matters." Brett leaned in. "You built Anderson Holdings by being ruthless, efficient, objective. Now you're halting projects, missing calls, turning down million-dollar deals, all for a girl who's not even your daughter?" Lucas didn't raise his voice, but his words cut clean. "She's family. That matters more than a balance sheet." Brett stood, collected his tablet. "I hope she's worth everything you're about to lose." Lucas watched him walk out, his heart a storm of anger and something heavier, fear. That evening, he returned home later than usual. Sophie was curled up on the couch, headphones on, humming to herself while sketching set designs in a spiral notebook. The sight softened his mood instantly. "Hey, theater queen," he greeted, dropping his coat. Sophie looked up, grinning. "You're late. I already ate your share of the garlic knots." Lucas chuckled, sitting beside her. "Remind me never to trust an 11-year-old with carbs again." But as they laughed, Sophie's eyes flicked to his face. "You okay?" He paused. "Just work stuff." "Like boring stuff, or I might lose my job stuff?" she asked gently. Lucas blinked, caught off guard by her directness. "Somewhere in between." She leaned her head against his arm. "You don't have to explain it. Just don't let them take the theater away." The words landed like a soft blow. He nodded, swallowing the knot in his throat. "I won't, I promise." The next day, however, Sophie overheard something she wasn't supposed to. She had gone to the kitchen early that morning to get water when she heard Lucas on the phone in his office. The door wasn't fully closed. "She's a child, not a threat," he said firmly. "And if Margaret wants to pull her shares because I'm spending time with my niece, let her. I won't back down." Sophie froze. Niece. Not daughter, not even goddaughter, just a niece. The word echoed in her chest like an empty hall. Suddenly, all the late nights at the theater, all the painting and piano lessons and bedtime promises, they felt distant, conditional. That night, Lucas returned to find the apartment quiet. Too quiet. "Sophie?" he called. No answer. Her room was empty, the sheets on her bed undisturbed, her backpack gone. His heart plunged into panic. He called Ruth, the shelter's director. Nothing. The theater team. Nothing. Then, almost by instinct, he rushed to Central Park, the place where Sophie had once told him she liked to go when the world felt too heavy. There she was, sitting at the base of a statue of her mother's favorite Broadway character, clutching the locket Lucas had found in the theater. Her knees were drawn up, her chin resting on them. "Sophie," he breathed, hurrying toward her. She didn't look up. "You said I was family." "I meant it." "But I heard you," she said, voice cracking. "You called me your niece, like I was something extra, like I didn't really belong." Lucas sank down beside her. "Sophie, listen to me. I didn't mean it like that." She wiped her eyes, still not meeting his gaze. "They said I'm making you lose your job, that I'm ruining things. I don't want you to lose everything because of me." Lucas's throat tightened. "You didn't ruin anything. You reminded me what life is for." He reached out, gently lifting her chin so she would look at him. "When I found you, I thought I was doing something noble, saving a piece of my past. But the truth is, Sophie, you saved me." Her lips trembled. "Then why does it feel like I'm the problem?" "Because the world doesn't understand what really matters," he said softly. "But we do." They sat in silence for a long moment. Then he pulled her close, holding her like he should have done years ago for the sister he'd lost. "I don't care what I lose. You are my family, and I'll fight anyone who says otherwise." As Sophie finally allowed herself to cry into his chest, the city around them faded. And Lucas knew the world could take his title, his tower, his reputation, but it would never take Sophie. Not again. Lucas returned to his apartment the next morning with Sophie still fast asleep in the guest room, curled under the navy quilt she'd chosen herself. The emotional night before had left them both raw, but somehow more bonded than ever. He walked into his office and flipped open his laptop, the glow of the screen reflecting in his tired eyes. There were a dozen emails flagged urgent, most with the same subject line: Crescent Theater Project. A pit formed in his stomach. By 9 a.m., his private line rang. It was Brett again. "Lucas," Brett said, skipping any pleasantries, "you've been summoned." Lucas exhaled slowly. "Where?" "Conference room B, full board." 15 minutes later, Lucas stood at the head of the glossy oval table, his reflection swimming in its polished surface. Around him, the board members of Anderson Holdings sat in frosty silence, their suits crisp, their expressions unreadable. Brett stood to his right, arms crossed. Margaret Lane, one of the senior shareholders, cleared her throat first. "We understand you've diverted significant personal funds and executive time into a side project not disclosed to shareholders." Lucas remained calm. "I haven't used a single dollar from the company's budget. The theater renovation is entirely personal." "And yet," Brett interjected coldly, "your name, your title, and your absence from strategic negotiations have already impacted market confidence." Margaret nodded. "We're concerned your judgment has become compromised." Lucas leaned forward. "You think building a future for a child, restoring a historic community space, and honoring my family's legacy is compromised judgment?" "Legacy doesn't balance ledgers," Brett replied stiffly. Lucas studied their faces. People he'd dined with, built dreams with, made millions for. Now they looked at him like he was a liability. "You all came to my sister's funeral," he said quietly. "You knew how much she meant to me. That theater was her dream." "Then keep it a personal one," another board member muttered. Lucas nodded slowly. "I see." He pulled a manila folder from his briefcase and laid it on the table. "Inside is my temporary resignation as CEO, effective immediately." Gasps and murmurs broke the silence. Margaret looked stunned. "Lucas, don't be rash." "I'm not," he interrupted, his voice steady. "I'm choosing what matters. That little girl has already lost her mother. She doesn't need to lose the only family she has left because I'm too busy chasing quarterly reports." He turned to leave, but paused at the door. "Oh, and by the way," he added, his voice tinged with conviction, "I didn't lose focus. I finally found it." Back at the apartment, Sophie greeted him with cautious eyes. "How did it go?" she asked quietly. Lucas set his briefcase down and sat beside her on the couch. "I stepped down." Her face fell. "Because of me? No," he said firmly. "Because of us." Sophie sat in silence for a moment, then threw her arms around him. "Thank you." Lucas hugged her back tightly. "We're going to finish that theater, Sophie. We're going to fill it with music and lights and laughter." The next few weeks passed in a blur of paint-streaked clothes, hammering, and laughter echoing through scaffolding. Sophie designed posters with her friends from the shelter, while Lucas negotiated building permits and hired local artists to preserve the original stage murals. One evening, Lucas was reviewing lighting options in the lobby when he heard a soft piano melody drifting from the stage. He stepped into the auditorium and froze. Sophie sat at the grand piano they'd restored, her small fingers dancing across the keys. She was singing, not loudly, but with gentle confidence. It was a melody he hadn't heard in decades. A song his sister used to sing. Lucas's eyes welled up. When the last note faded, Sophie turned and saw him. "I didn't know you were listening." "I always am," he said, voice cracking slightly. "What was that?" "Something your sister wrote," she said. "I found the lyrics in the music box you gave me." He smiled through his tears. "She would have loved to hear you sing it." "Maybe," Sophie said, blushing, "but I think she already did." They stood in the theater's soft lighting, the silence full of something sacred. Lucas walked forward and knelt beside her. "You're going to open this place, Sophie. The first show. You and every kid who's ever been told they're too small, too quiet, too forgotten." She bit her lip. "What if I mess up? Then you get back up and try again. That's what brave people do." Sophie looked into his eyes. "Even grown-ups?" "Especially grown-ups." Outside, the city bustled on. But within those worn, red brick walls, something beautiful was being built. Not just a theater, but a life neither of them had dared imagine. A life where broken things were fixed, where orphans found families, where millionaires remembered how to dream, and where one little girl finally found her stage. The night before the grand opening of the Sophie Theater, rain fell steadily over the city, soaking the freshly painted marquee and dampening the final rehearsal mood. Inside the refurbished auditorium, Lucas paced the aisle, while a lighting technician adjusted spotlights above. Backstage, Sophie was unusually quiet. She sat on a folding chair, staring at her shoes, the hem of her stage dress resting on her knees. Her fingers twirled the chain around her neck, the pendant that once belonged to her mother. Lucas peeked in. "5 minutes, superstar," he said softly. She looked up and gave a small smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I'm scared." Lucas knelt beside her, resting his hand on hers. "That's because it matters. Every great thing I've done in life started with fear." Sophie glanced toward the stage curtain. "What if they laugh at me? What if I forget the words? What if I'm not good enough?" Lucas hesitated, then gently said, "Can I tell you a secret?" She nodded. "When I lost your mom, my sister, I stopped singing, playing, dreaming. I thought the only way to survive grief was to bury everything that made me feel. But then you sang in that broken theater, all alone, like you were meant to be heard. And suddenly, I remembered who I was. You reminded me." Sophie blinked, her lips trembling. "You're not just good enough, Sophie. You're the reason this whole place came back to life." She threw her arms around him, and he held her tightly. The warmth of her small embrace reminded him that sometimes the greatest strength lies in vulnerability. A knock sounded at the dressing room door. It was Grace from the orphanage, holding a bouquet of daisies. "Break a leg," she whispered to Sophie, and then disappeared into the wings. Sophie stood, wiped her eyes, and nodded. "Okay, let's do this." The house lights dimmed. The audience, a mix of community members, former skeptics, local media, and a handful of industry insiders, settled into silence. Then the curtain rose. A single spotlight illuminated the stage. Sophie stepped into it, her dress shimmering under the soft glow. The microphone in front of her seemed almost too tall, but she adjusted it with steady hands. Her voice, when it came, was soft at first, barely more than a whisper. "I was a note without a melody, a light that no one saw." Then it grew, stronger, bolder. The auditorium fell into a collective hush. Lucas watched from the wings, his heart pounding with pride. The song, titled "I Found My Stage," was one Sophie had written with Lucas over long evenings at the piano, inspired by her memories and her mother's lullabies. It was a tribute to loss, resilience, and the courage to step into the light. When the final note soared and held in the air, a breathless silence followed. Then, thunderous applause. Sophie stood frozen for a beat, her eyes wide. Then she smiled, a real, radiant smile. Lucas walked out to join her. Without a word, she reached for his hand. Together, they bowed. The ovation doubled. As they exited the stage, reporters tried to crowd him, but Lucas waved them off. Tonight belongs to her. Back in the dressing room, Sophie clutched his hand. "Did I do okay?" Lucas knelt down. "You did more than okay. You changed lives." She grinned. "Like you said, sometimes being brave is just showing up." Kissed her forehead. "And you showed up like a star." That night, as the rain stopped and the streets glistened under city lights, Lucas carried Sophie, fast asleep in his arms, to the car. Her head rested against his chest, her pendant catching the glow from the theater sign now shining bright. The Sophie Theater. He looked back once more, eyes misting. For the first time in years, he felt whole. Not because of a deal or a title, but because he'd found something he didn't know he was still missing. He'd found family. And she had found her voice. Together, they were rewriting the final act. Not just of a show, but of a life interrupted by sorrow, now stitched together by song. The next morning, the front page of the New York Chronicle featured a full-width image of Sophie mid-song, eyes closed, arms open to the spotlight. Below it, the headline read, "Theater Reborn by a Child's Song and a CEO's Redemption." Lucas sat at the kitchen island, sipping his coffee slowly as Sophie devoured a stack of pancakes nearby. Her feet swung from the stool rhythmically, the way only kids did when the world felt right. She pointed to the newspaper spread out beside them. "I still can't believe that's me," she whispered in awe. Lucas smiled gently. "You made the city stop and listen, Sophie. That's no small thing." Just then, the doorbell rang. Lucas's housekeeper, Maria, called from the foyer. "Mr. Anderson, someone's here to see you. Says it's urgent." Lucas frowned slightly, rising. "Sophie, finish your breakfast, okay?" She nodded, mouth full. At the door stood Mason Wilder, Lucas's oldest business partner and a major shareholder in the firm. Beside him, two other board members stood with grim expressions. It didn't take long to guess the reason for their visit. "We need to talk," Mason said without greeting. Lucas motioned them inside. In his study, the men wasted no time. "You've poured millions into restoring a dilapidated theater," said Frank Hastings, one of the board members, "and now the media's spinning a narrative about you as some artistic philanthropist." "That theater gave a child hope," Lucas replied calmly. Mason leaned forward, voice lower. "Hope doesn't drive quarterly earnings. We're getting calls from investors. They want to know what direction you're taking this company." Lucas let out a quiet breath. "I'm taking it in a direction that means something." Frank's voice sharpened. "This isn't a charity, Lucas. We're considering a vote to transfer your executive powers temporarily." The room fell silent. Lucas looked out the window, watching Sophie in the backyard through the glass, barefoot on the lawn, twirling with a sunflower in hand. He turned back. "If what I've done for that girl threatens your portfolios, then by all means, vote." Mason shifted uncomfortably. "We're not trying to punish you. We're trying to protect the company." "No," Lucas replied quietly. "You're protecting the illusion that only profit matters." Without another word, the men left. Their departure echoed with the heavy footfalls of shifting power. That night, Lucas told Sophie they were taking a break from business. A little more time for music, for life. She looked up from her sheet music. "Are you in trouble?" He smiled softly. "Only the kind that comes from doing the right thing." That weekend, the theater held its first community workshop. Dozens of children, many from group homes or underfunded schools, filled the aisles. Sophie led a singing warm-up, her confidence blooming. Emily, one of the vocal coaches, leaned in to Lucas. "You know she's already inspired 3 more kids to sign up for auditions?" Lucas watched Sophie guide a shy boy to the front. "That's her magic," he murmured. Later, Sophie tugged on Lucas's sleeve. "Can we call the theater something else too?" He crouched beside her. "What do you mean?" "Well," she hesitated. "Mom used to say home is where someone believes in you. Maybe we could call it Believer's Hall? Not just for me, but for everyone?" Lucas blinked against the emotion swelling in his chest. "That's beautiful. I think Mom would like that." She added softly. Lucas nodded, voice thick. "I think she'd be proud of the both of us." That night, he sat at his piano again for the first time in years. Sophie joined him, her fingers unsure at first, but growing braver with each note. Their melody rose, a quiet duet between past and future. Outside, Believer's Hall stood lit against the night, its stage no longer dark, its seats no longer empty. And inside, for the first time in decades, Lucas didn't feel alone. He had found something no empire could buy. He had found home. Lucas arrived early at the newly renovated theater, his heart quietly pounding with anticipation. The marquee glowed against the early evening sky. Believer's Hall presents A Night of Light, curated by Sophie Anderson. The name shimmered in gold, catching the eyes of passers-by who paused to admire the transformation of the once-forgotten building. Inside, the lobby buzzed with energy. Children from group homes, foster families, and local schools wandered wide-eyed through the elegant space, admiring the velvet curtains, the polished wood floors, and the framed photos on the walls, capturing moments from the theater's grand past and hopeful rebirth. Sophie stood near the stage entrance in a soft lilac dress, her hair tied back with a ribbon that once belonged to her mother. Lucas walked over slowly, not wanting to interrupt her moment. "You ready?" he asked quietly. She turned, eyes wide but steady. "I think so. Are you?" Lucas chuckled, gently straightening the collar of her cardigan. "More than I ever thought I'd be." Just then, a small boy with tousled brown hair ran up to Sophie. "Miss Sophie! Miss Sophie! I forgot my lyrics!" Without missing a beat, Sophie knelt beside him and whispered the first few lines into his ear. The boy smiled, nodded, and darted back toward the dressing room. Lucas watched her with quiet admiration. You're already a leader, Sophie. She blushed, lowering her gaze. I just want them to feel what I felt the first time I sang here. Safe, seen. Lucas swallowed hard. You've given them something I couldn't build with 1,000 buildings. Backstage, the crew began ushering the kids into their places. Emily, the vocal coach, handed Lucas a program. Wait till you see what she put together, she whispered. It's not just music, it's a story. The house lights dimmed. A hush fell over the crowd. Then softly, a single spotlight illuminated the stage. Sophie walked to the center, holding a small notebook. Her voice, delicate yet certain, filled the space. Tonight's program is called A Night of Light, because light is what we carry inside when the world around us feels dark. Every song tonight was chosen by someone who needed a little light. And now, we want to share it with you. The audience erupted in applause. One by one, the children took the stage. Some singing, some reciting poems, others dancing. Every piece was raw and beautiful, echoing stories of loss, hope, fear, and triumph. When it was Sophie's turn again, she stepped forward alone. This next song, she said, was written by someone who once lost his music, but helped me find mine. The first notes of the piano began. Lucas froze. He recognized the melody instantly. It was one he had written long ago for his sister. Sophie had found it in a dusty journal and insisted they play it together. But this time, she had added words. Her words. As she sang, the lyrics painted a vivid story of finding family in unexpected places, of rebuilding what was broken, and of believing even when you're scared. Lucas sat motionless, the music washing over him like a wave of memory and redemption. When the final note faded, Sophie looked directly at him. For you, she said softly, and the curtain fell. Tears welled in Lucas's eyes as the crowd leapt to its feet in a thunderous standing ovation. Parents, guardians, teachers, and strangers clapped until their hands ached. A few even cried openly. After the show, Sophie rushed into Lucas's arms. You didn't cry, did you? She teased gently. Only the part where you stole my entire heart, he joked, voice trembling. Emily walked over, placing a hand on Lucas's shoulder. You built more than a theater here. You built a place where healing happens. He looked around at the joyful chaos, children being hugged by their mentors, strangers offering donations, and a buzz of possibility filling the air. I think, Lucas said slowly, we all needed this stage. Outside, the night air was crisp. Lucas and Sophie stood on the steps of Believers' Hall, watching as families dispersed into the darkness, glowing from the inside out. Think we should do it again next year? Sophie asked, squeezing his hand. Lucas smiled through tears. Every year, as long as you'll have me. Sophie leaned her head on his arm. I think Mom would have loved this place, she whispered. Lucas stared up at the glowing sign above them. She does. I feel it every time you sing. And there, under the soft golden lights, a man who had built towers found something far greater. He had built a home, a legacy, and a place where a little girl's voice could echo forever. The first snow of the season fell gently on New York as Lucas and Sophie stepped into the quiet warmth of their apartment. The echoes of applause from the grand reopening of Believers' Hall still pulsed in their ears, like the afterglow of a dream they never wanted to end. Sophie kicked off her shoes, her cheeks still flushed from the night's emotion. Lucas followed behind, clutching the handwritten program she'd created. He ran his fingers over the cover, where she'd written in delicate block letters, "For the ones who stayed, for the ones who returned." Want some cocoa? Lucas asked, his voice still hoarse from emotion. Sophie nodded eagerly. Extra marshmallows. He smiled and disappeared into the kitchen, and a few moments later he returned with two mismatched mugs, one bearing the faded logo of a Broadway show, the other a souvenir from his first construction project. They settled onto the couch, wrapped in a thick throw blanket, the city twinkling beyond the windows like a million tiny spotlights. "I meant every word I sang tonight," Sophie said softly, staring into her cocoa. Lucas looked at her, emotion tightening his throat. "I know you did. I used to think. The world forgot me, that I was invisible." He reached over and gently took her hand. "You were never invisible, sweetheart. You were just waiting for your light to be seen." She smiled sadly. "I guess we both were." They sat in silence for a moment, letting the warmth between them speak louder than words ever could. Later that night, Lucas climbed the creaky stairs of the building's attic, a space he hadn't entered in years. He pulled out a dusty trunk marked Claire. Inside were journals, old photographs, and music sheets scrawled in his sister's bold handwriting. Near the bottom he found a photo of Claire holding a toddler in a green dress. Sophie. His breath caught. On the back, Claire had written, "She has your stubbornness, your fire. I hope she finds her way to you one day." Lucas closed his eyes, overcome by the gentle weight of her words. "She did, Claire," he whispered. "She did." Weeks passed. Winter deepened. On Christmas Eve, Lucas and Sophie stood side by side at the front steps of Believer's Hall. Fresh garlands framed the entry, twinkling lights wound through the banisters, and a gentle snowfall blanketed the city. A holiday benefit show was underway inside, a mix of carols, dramatic readings, and heartfelt solos by children who now called the theater a second home. Sophie tugged on Lucas's coat sleeve. "I have a surprise for you." He raised an eyebrow. "Better than a full house and standing ovation?" She nodded, eyes sparkling. "Come on." She led him through the backstage corridor, past the dressing rooms, and into the small green room Claire used to rest in between acts. On the wall hung a new plaque. Lucas stepped closer. The Claire Anderson Studio. A room to dream. He blinked, swallowing hard. "You did this?" "I talked to the city. Emily helped. It's official. This space is for any kid who needs a safe place to find their voice." Lucas knelt down and wrapped her in a tight embrace. "You amaze me, Sophie. Every day." "I had a good teacher," she whispered into his coat. Later that evening, as they returned home, Sophie disappeared into her room and returned holding a gift box wrapped in music note-patterned paper. "Merry Christmas, Dad," she said shyly. Lucas stared, stunned. What did you just say?" She smiled, fighting tears. "I think I've called you everything else. It's time I called you what you really are." His heart burst as he took the box, hands trembling. Inside was a framed photograph of the two of them standing under the Believer's Hall sign, arms raised in celebration. Beneath it, a quote in Sophie's handwriting, "Sometimes the best stages are built not to perform, but to heal." Lucas looked up, eyes misty. "You just gave me the greatest role of my life." They spent the rest of the night talking, laughing, and listening to old records Claire had loved. The warmth of their new home, a home not of steel and glass, but of shared purpose and chosen family, wrapped around them like the softest blanket. And somewhere in the hush of snowfall and the flicker of candlelight, a once lonely CEO and a once forgotten little girl wrote the last line of their story not with words, but with love. A love that would echo through every note, every stage light, every brave voice that dared to sing in the dark, forever.